I've improved my portrait drawings a lot over the past 2 years or so. And in this video, I thought I'd compare one of my older drawings to a more recent one of the same subject. In this case, Gary Oldman's Dracula from one of my favorite movies of all time. I'll show you the process of drawing this new portrait while talking about 5 changes that I've made to my technique that I feel have improved my portrait drawings. So here's my older portrait. It's a charcoal drawing that I made in 2020 and was very happy with. It's been hanging in our hallway ever since, and I still like it. But I made this before I really started practicing portraiture for real, so I made a lot of, I don't want to call them mistakes, because art is subjective and we all have different tastes and we go through different phases in our artistic development. I'm not being judgmental towards my past self or towards anyone who's at a different stage in their own practice. What I perceive as a flaw in my art might be an attractive feature for someone else. I don't believe there are mistakes in art, simply decisions that we might or might not be happy with afterwards. And looking at this drawing, I see a lot of things that I feel could be improved. Like the values, for example. Looking at this, I see barely any midtones at all, except in the background. There's black and there's white, the white of the paper. And the face looks kind of overexposed and it lacks a feeling of three-dimensionality. Then there's the flat, monotone background and the dense blackness of the hair and the eyes and the shoulders. I did do a good job of adding some subtle highlights to the hair at the crown and on this right side, but it's all very stiff. Too much detail in places where there doesn't have to be details. I remember spending an awful lot of time on the patterns here on the coat, for example. And too little detail where there should be, like in the eyes. They just look dead and fish-like. In fact, the whole portrait looks a bit dead, which I guess is appropriate considering the subject. But just because the subject lacks life, it doesn't mean the portrait has to. Now let's look at how I approached the same subject, the same reference photo, in a more recent drawing. I start by eye measuring out the larger shapes of the face and the hair. This is where I squint at the photo and I try to forget that I'm looking at a face. I just try to recreate the simple shapes as accurately as I can and trying to get the accurate placements of the facial features, like the brow line and the eyes and the angle of the nose. Then what I do, instead of getting lost in the details too early, is that I start blocking in the core shadows. I let the shadow shapes guide me towards accurate proportions. There are 2 main approaches to a portrait that I have come across, at least. Some artists prefer to make a really tight and accurate structural sketch first, where they measure out everything, the angles and the geometry of the head, the planes of the face, the placement of the facial features and all that. It's a great approach that, if done right, will probably help you get the likeness and the proportions accurate. It will also help you get a sense of three-dimensionality in the face. But I just don't enjoy working that way. I don't have the patience for it. The times that I've tried it, I just end up not liking the result. The portrait often ends up looking really stiff and flat and overworked. My tendency is to overthink and overwork in my art regardless of medium. It's something I have to constantly work against. So focusing instead on lights and shadows and midtones, it encourages me to be more loose, and I tend to enjoy the end result of those drawings much more. Even if they're not perfectly accurate, at least there's life there. And so now I'm at the stage where I think to myself, yeah, this is looking accurate enough for now. Let's block in some values. I do that here with some black pan pastel, one of my absolute favorite mediums to work with, together with charcoal. This older portrait I made with only compressed charcoal, which is part of the problem, I think, because compressed charcoal is very difficult to erase on a grainy paper like this, which might be a reason why I avoided adding midtones to the face. Pan pastel, like vine or willow charcoal, is very soft, not as dark, and much easier to erase, so I don't have to be so careful. I can be more wild and intuitive. And here I'm once again squinting at the reference and trying to get the overall value composition to feel right. I want a nice balance between darkest darks and midtones and highlights. And I'm using a toned paper here too, so I already have much of my midtones taken care of. I'm blending together my subject with the background in some places, letting the hair and the shoulder kind of melt together. This is called value grouping, and it helps to simplify the subject and create more mystery in the image. We don't need to see where the shoulder ends and the hair begins. It's not important. Instead of using charcoal pencil to render in every detail of the pattern on the clothes, I just hint at it here with some loose brushwork. Because yeah, this feels more like brushwork than line work. I prefer a more painterly approach in my drawings and only use pencils for sharp details. I feel like it creates a nice contrast between sharp and blurry, which adds to the illusion of three-dimensionality. And now, instead of evenly filling out the background, I choose one dark and one lighter side. Since I know that I want to emphasize the left side of the head with that dark silhouette and that lock of hair, I need to create contrast there. So I'm keeping the background brighter on that side and darker on the other, but still leaving that lighter edge of the hair and just hinting at some curls there. Not drawing in a bunch of strands like in my older drawing, but just blocking in the shape and drawing out a few highlights with an eraser. Now I'm focusing on the most important details of this portrait, which are the eyes. I've learned a lot about drawing eyes, which is really difficult to do as a beginner. We tend to either oversimplify them, like I did in my older drawing, or overcomplicate them. I'm aiming somewhere in the middle here, just slightly brightening up part of the upper eyelid and the whites of the eyes and the lower inner eyelids, which tend to catch more light. And I'm adding those bright, crisp highlights to the eyeballs that I love. Blending my background together a bit, making it more dynamic. I love the visible brush strokes of the pan pastel with this palette knife. If you want to see more of how I use it in portraits, check out some of the videos linked below in the description. Now it's finally time for highlights. And here, since I've used toned paper to set the midtones, I use chalk to bring out the brightest highlights. I'm still getting that face pretty bright and popping out of the darkness, but with some more life to it. And I'm using a white charcoal pencil to add those final crisp highlights. I'm not using it anywhere else, like in the hair or on the clothes, even though it's tempting. Adding highlights is so much fun, and it's easy to get carried away and end up overworking the drawing. So, in conclusion, the 5 things that I've done to improve my portraits. Number 1, focusing on values instead of a structural line drawing. It's just what works better for me to get the results that I enjoy. Number 2, being more dynamic with my midtones instead of just having shadows and highlights. And using toned paper really helps a lot here. Number 3, being selective with details and sharpness, not drawing everything in even though it's tempting. Number 4, using the background to emphasize parts of my subject, as opposed to just filling in a flat tone. And number 5, being careful with highlights, not overexposing the face or drawing attention to unimportant details. If you are a beginner artist and you want to get better at portrait drawing, I have a course for you. It's called Portrait Drawing for Beginners, and in it I teach you a quick and simple way to immediately start improving your portraits. From choosing the right reference photos and taking creative liberty with them, to getting your initial sketch accurate, to shading and rendering and capturing the likeness of a person. It's the class I wish I'd had when I just started out and was getting so overwhelmed by anatomy lessons and complicated wireframe methods. I promise to keep things really simple in this course so that you can get right to practicing as efficiently as possible. The course is only about an hour long and it's affordable, and you can get it via the link in the description. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in another video.